Hello, friends and future colleagues. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Law Guest Talk Show. My name is Muskan Narang and I'm your host for today. Today, we have a special guest whose work lies in the ever so fascinating intersection of psychology and forensic science. Joining us is none other than Arjun B. Hargan, a distinguished forensic psychologist currently making waves at Cognizant West. Arjun's academic journey begins with a BSc in Forensic Science from Jain School of Sciences, followed by an MSc in Forensic Psychology from the National Forensic Sciences University. His expertise in psychological investigative techniques such as the polygraph, the BEOS profiling, the layered voice analysis is unparalleled. With over a year of experience as a forensic psychologist, Arjun has been instrumental in conducting training programs, workshops, and internships in forensic psychology. He has also contributed significantly to research in detection of deception and the neurological aspects of deviant behavior. Before his current role, he worked as a research intern where he gained hands-on experience with cutting-edge forensic tools and techniques. Let's delve into the mind of this incredible professional and explore the intriguing world of forensic psychology. Please welcome Arjun, sir.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction filled with praise, of course, Muskan, and it's a pleasure to be here.
That's great. I was very excited, because this is something that I always wanted to cover on my channel, just because of how intricately attached these two topics are, like forensic psychology and criminal law. So I was very interested in behaviors and criminal profiling. So we're going to talk about a variety of topics today, and also covering something which is related to serial killers or different cases and everything. So I'm very excited about this. So let's talk about who is a forensic psychologist and how does one become a forensic psychologist.
Okay, so a forensic psychologist essentially is somebody who works. So if I were to define what a forensic psychologist is, I'll start with what forensic psychology is primarily. Forensic psychology is the integration of principles and theoretical perspectives of psychology into that of the legal system. Okay? We are applying principles of psychology that are aiding the criminal justice system and the investigative procedures in different parameters, whether they are the investigative perspectives, the rehabilitation perspectives, or in the judicial perspective as well. These are three basic parameters where a forensic psychologist works. To any capacity, a forensic psychologist is somebody who is conducting different forms of assessments and interviews associated to individuals involved in a case at hand to uncover facts associated to the case at hand and to aid individuals who have been affected by the crime in itself. This would be the core operational definition of a forensic psychologist, I'd say.
Okay, all right. So why I was saying that law and forensic psychology are very in touch with each other. Also, I believe that lawyers are only limited to maybe assessing people on some basis and then putting them behind bars, like some level of that assessment. But what I think forensic psychologists are really more impactful than lawyers are in the society, I believe, because you try to discover what is the what, how, what, when, of all of this. So our responsibility is limited and only limited to maybe just putting people behind bars or getting them out. But forensic psychology is about how maybe why did the crime actually take place. Maybe it could be because of parents, the environment, does the prison system actually work or not? Do you think that people actually just go inside and become bigger criminals? And even if, let's say, the rehabilitation, which is the basis of our Indian legal system, that rehabilitation more than punishment. So does that even work or not? And people who are up there, people who are actually making the laws, do they understand the reality of what is going on with people, what is in their brain? So I would say IPC and CRPC, these two provisions, they help us to generalize a lot of these crimes. But what forensic psychology does is to absolutely like take like a magnifying glass on this particular person who has done this particular crime, and why what happened, why, and how can we prevent that. So all of these different things, and maybe like we can also like further talk about how people reoffend and what is the need for them to reoffend, right? So like that is why I always found that forensic psychology and being a forensic psychologist is something which is much more of like a impactful the contribution to society. So, and mostly like people, how they treat like the media, how they treat criminals, I don't know if you agree or not, but the way that they believe that they are some form of Satan, and there has to be something wrong with the person itself that this person has contributed like this. So what do you have to say?
So media trials is something that are very rampantly happening, very much before the actual verdict in the court of law happens. The media trial happens, which is announced that this individual is the perpetrator, irrespective of whatever the verdict is.
Right.
A very good example of this is a case that happened in the United States of America, which is a very notable case, which is the case of O.J. Simpson,
Right.
who was a veteran football player, and the whole country basically split into two, where one half said that this fellow has committed the crime and must face the punishment for the crime in itself, while the other half said that this is a hate crime where O.J. Simpson was being targeted on account of racism.
Right.
So, irrespective of what the fact was, what the evidentiary findings were, what the legal procedures were, the media has given such a dichotomy altogether. Right? They've given such a disparity of, not disparity, sorry, I would like to call it such a divided opinion on whether the individual is the perpetrator or not. Irrespective, they've caused an entire chaotic environment altogether in that particular place, right? So these are instances that do happen a lot, where with forensic acumen and forensic psychology, there comes more objectivity into the picture. We try to eliminate all possibilities of bias, keep it aside, whether it's intrinsic biases or extrinsic biases. We try to inculcate as much objectivity as possible, and that is established by ensuring that our assessment and investigation is more empirical than assumptive. When I say empirical over assumptive, the idea is it does not matter what I think. My objective is to conduct an objective analysis of this particular individual in whatever context, whether it's some form of a psychological assessment to state whether this individual is liable for the insanity plea, let's say, for example, or whether this person under the polygraph examination is found to be deceptive or not. These are ways that forensic psychologists ensure to maintain objectivity. We try to, like how you mentioned, we magnify the particular aspect. I would say one step further, we also may try to dissect the entire ordeal and try to examine carefully onto those particular facets and try to give an objective answer.
Right. Okay.
So yeah.
With the media especially, I think there are two things that I was exposed to while I was researching about this. Was that one, so of course when it comes out to the media, they present opinions, and also the way that we consume these sort of medias, it's very like the way that these cases sensationalize, it's crazy. They know that they are selling it to somebody who's ready to receive it, right? So be it the Sheena Bora murder case, which I've mentioned, which I've like shared on this channel as well, all of these different cases that happen, the amount of curiosity that people have about what happened, and also to villainize the person who's there out in the media, the way that Indrani Mukherjee was also targeted by this media, and she has been she's out of the jail right now, and even Arushi Talwar and Hemraj double murder case, the parents were villainized in front of everyone just because of how they conduct themselves in interviews. All of these things happen. One thing is that either people right now are taking it too lightly by making memes. So if you remember the Poonawalla case, this guy about the fridge and everything, people started making memes about that. People started making it very casual, as if like in conversation, like mentioning it. Or there is another perspective where there was a 16-year-old in America who wanted to just kill somebody to understand what it feels like, because of how much we are exposed to all of these documentaries of serial killers and how fascinating, and of course they are very charming, these psychopaths, but right, if you say Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez, all of these people, very charming people, but honestly, like, the way that we are fascinated by this, the media, especially the way it's available, the information is available, how it's hyped, that causes like a lot of disbalance in society, I feel, because media impacts people very deeply.
Definitely.
Right. So even when it comes to impacting laws related to how media is, so let's say if the Nirbhaya case happened, right after that the laws were amended, and everyone was saying that we need harsher punishment for rapists, and every politician was just like going on and on about this. But do you think that people who are up there, people who are making the laws, maybe they need more education on the reality of, does harsher punishment relate to, or actually it turns out to be more productive or more efficient?
Correct. So this is a very important aspect, not only just in the world of forensic psychology, but essentially every behavioral science that is associated with the law. So forensic psychology is one field. Then there's also something called as criminology. Now, under criminology, we mainly focus on all of these parameters, especially under a subdivision of criminology, which is penology, the study of prison systems, right? In the prison system perspective, there are several theories as to why people are imprisoned. The most common assumption is as a means of punishment for retribution, an eye for an eye, basically the Old Testament, right? The idea is, because a person has committed a crime, they must face compensation for it. There are also other perspectives that are present, which is, for example, the reformative theory, where the idea is focused on the rehabilitational aspects. Now, the problem here is, we are so accustomed to imprisonment being a place of punishment in itself, of the most brutal and heinous nature, but we tend to only scarcely look at the rehabilitational significance. Fun fact, the earliest of prison systems were called penitentiaries. And what is a penitentiary? A place where a person serves penance.
Right.
In retrospecting on the acts that they have committed, so that they can perhaps not engage in such behavior subsequently.
Right.
But we are quite far away from that particular idea of imprisonment or detainment of any form, for that matter, right? With the amount of crime that happens in today's day and age, and the ramifications that it has upon society at large, there need to be certain amendments that perhaps be made, where we don't necessarily focus always on the criminal, but we focus on eliminating the crime as well, right? We need to try to find the root issue. Now, the root issue for criminal behavior is very diverse. There are so many perspectives to why a person commits crime. The common assumption is that it's because of the fact that they want to commit a crime, that they do not have a sense of morality. But there are layers to it in actuality. There are several theories in the world of forensic psychology which have been stated to have contributed to the role of different areas as to how they contribute to criminality and deviance. There's a social perspective, there's a developmental perspective, there is a neurobiological perspective, there's even a genetic perspective to criminality as well, right? Now, how do these particular areas blend into, and how much are they acknowledged by policymakers is the question. That is the one that needs to be answered, and answered in a manner that it is beneficial for the state and for the individual who has been detained, in such a manner that it benefits them into reintegrating into society as a law-abiding citizen.
Right. When we talk about prison systems, the idea that this individual who has done some crime needs to be separated from society and needs to be kept away from people in order to realize that maybe I have done something wrong, and also to be put with other criminals who are either did things of the same nature or even harsher things. Do you think that system actually works or not for the person?
As a collective, if there is no supervision that effectively tries to create a paradigm shift, I don't think it could be very helpful and effective.
Right.
There have been so many case studies where simplest of interventions have shown magnanimous changes in behaviors. I could be wrong about this, but I think a few years ago I read this case study about a prison system somewhere in Europe, where prisoners were given pets to take care of on a regular basis. All of them got cats and dogs. Right? Now, before that, there were a lot of riots, there was a lot of conundrums that were happening within the prison system. But upon the introduction of the entity, that is the pet in the form of a cat or a dog, the behaviors of the inmates changed a lot drastically over time. There were lesser riots and prison fights that were happening. So this is a small example of how you can introduce a certain paradigm that helps them regulate their behavior.
Right.
Now, in the grand calculus of events, there could be other parameters as well, where a forensic psychologist can essentially help out, which is in the rehabilitation sector, which could be individualized counseling for inmates, group counseling, different therapeutic techniques may be employed upon them to realign their perspectives on why they want to commit crime, so that at the very least, the conundrums that are causing them to commit crime, if they're at a psychological level, that can be helpful, right?
Okay.
So these are certain things that can be introduced to improve the pre-existing detainment, but it is yet to be looked into.
Right. I don't think we have seen the impact of this, or even the initiation of something like this, these activities. It's very little in India. I think I don't know if I've seen any. Any jail visit that I have done, mostly I've talked to a lot of jailers who say that they would say that 98% of people there are either people who did something in rage, or just that 3 or seconds of rage or something like that, and they committed that crime out of that. And then the rest 2%, 3% of people, they were actually like hardened criminals who actually had some sort of psychopathy going on. So in my own belief also, I believe that putting people who have done similar crimes or harsher crimes together, I don't think it serves any purpose, because I don't see a lot of people who are not becoming criminals or not doing illegal stuff when they're out of the jail. Staying with people who have done things and know how to do things maybe even better than you would lead to some result like that. So I wanted to talk to you about how if, let's say, when we see in movies and telly, all of these different forensic psychologists are there, and they make that job very attractive because everyone wanted to be a forensic psychologist in my batch at some point of time. They always thought that forensic psychology also relates to going on the crime scene and mostly like being investigators. What I figured out from my research was that it's more of consulting than investigating. Right. So do you think that in the real world, how many people do actually get to, as forensic psychologists, get to go on crime scenes and see all of these crimes happening, and what is your experience with it?
So in the most operational definitions, with forensic psychology, as I mentioned earlier, there's an investigative role that does exist. Now, from an investigative viewpoint, in our country, we are only accustomed to looking at roles where a forensic psychologist works in a forensic science lab, where they're conducting different investigative techniques like polygraph, narco-analysis, and so on and so forth. But in actuality, from the very inception of the world of forensic psychology, or even earlier than that for that matter, the FBI, for example, created a behavioral science unit, a behavioral analysis unit, I think is what it's called, whose basic role and responsibility is to conduct behavioral analyses of crime scenes to infer behavioral information from it. where
Right.
you can understand whether a person who has committed this particular crime is a first timer or a recidivist.
Right.
For viewers who are watching our channel, uh, a recidivist is an individual who is a repeated offender, who is accustomed to reoffending even after being imprisoned or even being caught for that matter, right? There are certain behavioral mannerisms associated to a first timer versus that of a recidivist. For example, a first timer may leave the crime scene in a very disheveled manner. It could be a crime of passion where they just um, act out in a fit of rage and then they may leave the evidences distorted, right? The room shows obvious signs of struggle, the evidences are all over the place, the murder weapon is not taken with the dead bodies right there. Whereas somebody who is a veteran, who's a repeated offender, might give a little more importance to it. They may try to wipe off any obvious evidences that they may have left off. They may try to clean any pool of blood that they may have possibly left there. They may take the murder weapon with them. They may cover the tracks by taking the dead body. Right? So these are certain nuanced differences between the two that do arise. So these are certain behavioral analyses that a forensic psychologist does have. So beyond the investigative realm in a forensic science lab, a forensic psychologist can conduct these evaluations as well. And then there's also something that cumulatively comes under the world of profiling, okay? From where the subdivision of forensic psychology, which is investigative psychology, has come into the picture, which talks everything about investigation, interviewing and interrogating victims, witnesses, suspects, whatever the case may be. You only interrogate suspects, whereas you can interview victims, witnesses, and suspects as well. What are certain behavioral mannerisms associated to each of these subgroups? What are certain techniques that can be employed in better obtaining information from these individuals? You will not believe that there are actual interviewing techniques that exist which are outside of the conventional I ask you a question, you give me an answer. There are elements from psychology that are incorporated which enable a better understanding and a better recall value of the events that transpired as well. Right? So these are also things that a forensic psychologist does.
Okay. When it so investigation is how many people maybe around you or people who have actually chosen forensic psychology do end up as people who are actually working on these cases, like actually going to crime scenes or doing these investigations? Like how many people in your estimate are actually landing up jobs like these?
So it's a very small percentage, I'll be honest. I have a friend of mine who used to work in Delhi police itself, who completed his master's in forensic psychology with me, and then he worked as a forensic professional with Delhi police as part of the crime scene investigating unit with other individuals with a background in forensic science. Right? So there he applied his acumen of forensic psychology and learned everything there is to about the investigative parameters, and then carried out his duty in conducting crime scene investigations. So it's a very small percentage, but the scope for it eventually will come about as and when there's more exposure and relevance associated to the particular field.
Right. Okay. So are you saying that people choose to be maybe academicians, educators, researchers after this particular qualification, or do they not have exposure to these jobs where investigation is a possibility?
So it's a little bit of both. Like, I will not generalize about every person wanting to take up a research or an academic position. I took it up because of my own sheer interest in research and academic.
Right.
So when it comes to the total collective, there are examinations that happen every 2 years, 3 years at the central level for individuals to work in forensic settings. Sometimes universities have MOUs with different labs and agencies where they employ individuals from. So these are the way the hiring process ensues. Otherwise, it's the service examinations that happen, like UPSC and stuff, through which usually individuals take up these roles accordingly.
Okay. The police also, when it comes to how police and the way that these people are treating prisoners, I think there is a lot of need for a lot of psychologists to come and counsel them, to also help their psychology or just alter them, because there are a lot of, when it comes to people in general, there is a lot of bias that comes in, right? About
Naturally.
maybe, right, so because India is very diverse in itself, we have different cultures and everything. The way that we are exposed to them over media or by how communities treat communities, I think it's very important that each police officer at least receives some sort of training when it comes to how to
Yeah,
treat prisoners,
yeah.
or how to treat under trial prisoners, especially because there are a lot of researches about under trial prisoners where they have gone in, not committed a crime, have been proven not to be committing a crime before, but then later on they start getting those that exposure of that behavior leads for them to commit crimes then, and they are more comfortable with that setting because that's the all they know for like these 10
Correct.
years that they've stayed in this case, especially this Sheena Bora murder case. Indrani Mukherjee was in jail for 10 years. And you can imagine, even though she got a solitary cell there in Mumbai, but still the amount of exposure that you have around you about all of these things that could, I'm not saying she would do that, something like that, but just as an example, people might might offend like for the first time ever because of how they're exposed to that. So I think that there's a lot of need for psychology in every aspect when it comes to even judges giving out verdicts, because I know in India after the Nanavati case, jury system is completely gone, because it's so easy to manipulate juries right now. They don't even have trainings for juries back in America where it's still existing. So I think at all stages of law and the judicial system, we really need like a lot of psychologists and work to get out. So it's a good field to get into at this moment. I think there's a lot of exposure in the future.
Like I would like to add to what you mentioned with certain theoretical frameworks being introduced to police officers and stuff. One major thing also should be about the fact that they need to be sensitized about interrogations, especially with interrogations of suspects. There is a high possibility of occurrence of false confessions based on how the interrogation is conducted. Now, let's say, for example, I have not committed a crime, but I have somehow become a suspect because there's certain circumstantial evidences that have stacked up against me. Now, as a person who's a firm believer of the criminal justice system, I may not be afraid of anything because I know for a fact that I've not committed any crime. But not every person is a firm believer of the criminal justice system. In our country, a layman individual, whenever they hear the name police, there is a shiver down their spine.
Right.
And that was me for the most of my life before I took up this profession myself. Right? So you are bound to feel very scared in the presence of a police officer as is. And to add to that, you are accused of a case of a crime that you didn't commit. You are scared like crazy at that particular instance. There are so many nuances and parameters here. What somebody who is very susceptible to be afraid, who's very easily scareable, to them an interrogative tactic where you are employing fear and stress as a metric of obtaining information could be very cumbersome an experience for that person. Right. It could be to the point that they might just confess just for the sake of getting out of there.
Right.
Because it is such a traumatic experience to be interrogated extensively for hours on end, right? So then better practices need to be introduced there as well, I feel.
Right. What police used to do before was that they used to get you a normal A4 size white piece of paper. They would ask you to sign it, and they would fill it up with whatever confession they wanted to get you there. But right now, what happens because of the provisions in the IPC, you have also the Constitution. It provides you a right against self-incrimination. Incrimination. So what happens is that you are protected by the law to not incriminate yourself. So the police also, even if you give a confession to a police officer, that is not admissible in court. What happens is that if the police officer takes you to a magistrate and then you are maybe somebody identifies you, or maybe you are giving out a confession, only then it's acceptable. So I think the law has identified this particular issue about maybe police brutality and how police treat these people. But actually, the point is that there was a case which was very long ago. I don't remember the exact name of the case, but there was a very simple-minded farmer boy who was convicted because he went to the police, and they, because of these leading questions, because of how he was a very simple-minded, very dim-wit boy, he was made to believe that he did the actual crime, and he was convicted of the crime. He was put in prison, and he spent all of his life there. But turns out that the way he was narrating the scenario, it changed every single time. Very intricate details he did not know about the case. So it was very clear that he was taught these things, and then that happened. Even like there are some people who get paid enough by maybe top rich businessmen and industrialists and whatnot, just to get the matter out. They would put it on somebody else that this person has done it, and then they would go scot-free. So these confessions actually don't really hold a lot of power to the police. Like if you confess to the police, they don't hold a lot of power in the court of law.
Correct.
So I think it's a fair balance there. Anyhow.
Fair enough.
So I was very curious about this thing. I think I asked you about this before, but that you decided to be an educator and academician after completing both of these degrees that you did. So why forensic psychology, first of all, because obviously it's very interesting, but how did you come across it? And secondly, did you always imagine and think that you were going to be teaching students? And also for the viewers here, he is a great teacher. I've seen like all of his introduction videos there. So and the course material that he prepared in the description, and it was very nice to like read all of this, and his contribution actually got my interest out, that really I should also be doing something like this. So like how did you came across this particular field, and also like how do you enjoy being an educator, and how do you go about like designing courses?
Firstly, thank you very much for the compliments on my teaching acumen. So, to give you a context on why I took up forensic psychology as a field, basically I did my bachelor's in forensic science, okay? Because I developed my interest in forensic science just as every other 18-year-old did around that time, by watching a heckload of crime thrillers and CSI, and to my misfortune, even CID as well. Okay?
All right.
So, as and when I was progressing in my academic journey during my bachelor's, I found different subjects within the world of forensic psychology, different fields in the world of forensic science that are present beyond what the pop culture shows us, right? One of those fields was forensic psychology. And forensic psychology caught my eye because it talked to me about how there are certain nuances in behavior beyond what is on the surface level. Always we assume that everything that we do is based on our rational choice, but there's more to it that meets the eye. There's always nuances in terms of the dynamics between your environment and your biological component and your neurobiological component. These are things that fascinated me. And then subsequently I pursued my master's in forensic psychology, where initially I wanted to be a forensic psychologist working in an investigative realm itself. But during my, not even during, actually post my master's days, as the pandemic happened, I was at home for a year. With a degree in master's in forensic psychology, I was home alone for a long time. And that time I tried to hone my skills in whatever way I could possibly do by doing a few additional courses within areas specifically of my interest, which are within the realms of neuropsychology as well, which I have vested interest in myself. Eventually, I took up a research intern / research assistant position at a lab here in Bangalore called as Axonet, which in fact is the laboratory that provides the equipment to different forensic science labs within the country. Right? So all of the investigative techniques that I talked about previously, most of them come through them, or some of them are even made by them.
Wow, okay.
Right? So I work under their tutelage, and that is where my interest in research truly sparked. Right? I've always been fundamentally a very curious individual, Not wanting to toot my own horn, but to me, I always want to understand what are the reasons as to why a certain thing works a certain way. I don't want egg A equals B. I need to understand the steps that led to A being equal to B. Right? So this is something that I've always been associating myself to, that I am more of a person who wants to understand the core aspects of everything that I'm engaging in. And that is something that somehow inherently a lot of researchers or people who love research have in common, right? So that is where my liking towards research began. And then eventually because I had relevant expertise in what I was learning, be it the polygraph examination or be it another investigative technique called as BIOS profiling, which is Barian electrical oscillation sequencer profiling. Because I had some amount of expertise in these particular techniques, I started engaging in conducting different workshops and training programs and stuff under the previous lab that I was working itself. Right, so that is where I knew that I could be a good educator as well. That and truly, to be candid with you, I like being an educator myself as well. To me, it seems great that I am able to provide information on something that I have a decent amount of knowledge about, and my willingness to share it with individuals, things that I am passionate about, is something that drives me to want to be an educator. Right? There are days where I thoroughly love teaching, and there are days where it's not as much fun, because so far I've only taught in online paradigms as of yet, where students keep their camera off, microphones off, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So it diminishes the entire aspect of teaching per se. But otherwise, also at the end of the day, I think I would thoroughly enjoy teaching, irrespective of when and where and how it is, because I believe I was destined for academy, to make it a tagline of sorts. Okay. I believe I was destined for academy and research, and these are areas that I enjoy thoroughly and thrive in, for that matter, and I would like to continue further within this realm itself.
Right. It also, I think this particular field also requires you to like socialize with people and talk to them. So I think somebody who is able to socialize, who likes to actually be around people all the time, not just work on a 9-to-5 job on a laptop, not with screens and not people, I think that person can really thrive in this job. So I think like we need good teachers, and I'm very happy that you are one. So
I hope I am.
I'm sure your students are going to leave comments now saying that you are one.
It's okay.
So we are going to, since you brought up the topic of polygraph, I can't wait to get into this next segment also. But before that, I have a very, I hope, fun activity for you, which is the myth or not quiz. So there are a few myths about forensic psychology. So I wanted to ask you a few questions, and you can answer, if that is a myth or not. So this quiz will test knowledge about common myths and facts in the field of forensic psychology. So let's start with the first question. The first one is, lie detector tests are highly reliable and are often used as a definitive proof of guilt and innocence in court.
False.
Okay, so it is a myth. They are not highly reliable.
I wouldn't say highly reliable. They do have some amount of reliability and validity, but because it is physiological parameters and the senses that we're assessing can be influenced through external factors as well. So the reliability relatively reduces.
Right, okay.
It is not completely unreliable, but it is not the best of techniques, so to speak, in terms of stating whether a person is deceptive or not.
Okay.
And pertaining to its admissibility in the court of law, this is a very common myth that people state that it is inadmissible. But in actuality, the court's permission itself is a prerequisite for a person to be conducted the polygraph on. Right. So if the court of law is permitting you, why would they not consider it to be admissible? It is admissible, but it is a corroborative evidence.
Actually, yes.
Because of Selvi versus State of Karnataka.
Right, absolutely. 2010.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know about forensic psychology and the law.
Yeah.
Okay. So, second question is, criminal profiling can accurately predict a criminal's future behavior and likelihood of reoffending.
It's somewhat, I wouldn't exactly say that you can pinpoint to the exact time and the exact instance where a person is going to commit a crime and nab them before they commit the crime. Right? The way that forensic investigation works and the way that these profiles are built is based on facts associated to the case so far that are found, which is in the form of evidences, the demographic information. Fundamentally, a criminal profile is built to either uncover the identity of an unknown perpetrator or to know more about a known perpetrator and predict the likelihood that they may be committing their crimes in these particular areas. There's something called as geographical profiling,
Right.
which is basically to map out what are certain areas that a person is likely to be operating from. Because humans are creatures of habit.
Right, right.
They will only engage in environments that are favorable to them. There's a cost-benefit analysis that a person unconsciously does for anything and everything, right? So in terms of criminality, also they will do the same. So these are patterns that we try to focus on and predict whether this particular individual is likely to be operating from within these areas, or these are areas they are likely to commit the crime from.
Right, right.
Commit the crime in. That is what the idea is of criminal
Also,
profiling.
just to ascertain if the gender is also like, because people, if you have no knowledge of the criminal, maybe you would want to know. So when you said this, I was thinking about this case about Jack the Ripper, right? Long back London. So they say that there could be Jane the Ripper, like there could be a woman there instead of Jack the Ripper. That is an alias, that is a name that is given to the person who might have committed these crimes. But it's like, if you are not engaging in these activities, the profiling and just understanding what the nature of the crime is. Also, there are many cases where, since you said about geographical, these indications where this person might be, people usually are able to track, like police agencies are able to track this might be the person, because it's very convenient for him to travel either in the radius of his home or his workplace. So they're able to like corroborate all of these different evidences and able to get this person behind bars. So
exactly.
This is very interesting. So okay, third myth or not, most criminals are mentally ill.
I would thoroughly disagree, because not every perpetrator is mentally ill per se. So if you call a psychological dysfunction to be mentally ill, now when we say mentally ill, the connotation is that something is not working as effectively in their mind. But the polar opposite is also there. No? An individual whose mind is working as efficiently as possible beyond the normal realm also is somebody who's committing crime. So I would not necessarily tag every person who's mentally ill under the tag of a criminal per se, or rather every criminal who is committing crime has a mental illness per se. Some of them commit crimes through the rational choice of wanting to commit crime. In others, there are certain determinants that are present which are influencing a behavior that leads to crime. So the true aspect that we may perhaps look into here is that there are several parameters that are operating simultaneously together in causing a person to commit a crime. Now, for example, what is stopping you and I from committing a crime? A moral constraint is there that no, this is immoral and unethical and I don't want to commit a crime. Plus, we've perhaps been around individuals who've influenced behavior that is pro-social and not necessarily anti-social, right? And the experiences we've had throughout our lives have created a sense of self-regulative behavior in our lives. But that may not be universal, right? Morality is subjective at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So it could be higher, it could be lower. And that is what also something that could influence the occurrence of criminal behavior and not just mental illnesses alone.
But let's say if there is a crime which is cannibalism, which is done by somebody, would you call a person who is is maybe a psychopath, is maybe of superior intelligence, but also commits cannibalism, would you call that person mentally ill?
So, if let's say if it is cannibalism in itself, from a legal viewpoint, obviously it is a crime in itself.
Right.
From a psychological viewpoint, we try to perhaps try to understand where is this cannibalistic tendency arising from. You would not necessarily attribute it to be a mental illness per se, but maybe there are elements of a condition that are causing this particular behavior. Maybe there are certain parts of the brain that are not functioning as effectively, which are supposed to prevent these particular aspects.
Okay.
For example, now this was a case study that I found out ironically through a meme, in which a resident of Kolhapur in Maharashtra killed his mother and ate his mother's dead body with chutney.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. Now this sounds to be very hideous, and this sounds to be the act of somebody who has no remorse or guilt at all, right? So where does this stem from? What are the causal factors for it? That need to be perhaps looked into. So a scrutiny on understanding these aspects, specifically what they are, will give you a much better understanding rather than just terming it as a mental illness alone. Maybe it is because of some elements of psychosis. Maybe it is certain narcissistic tendencies. Maybe it is histrionic tendencies, whatever the case may be, not just in the context of cannibalism, but anything for that matter.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand. Just that the way that people think about criminals, just like we mentioned before, is that they are absolutely evil according to people. Like criminals need to be punished. If they do something which is very disgusting, just even like as humans, we think that there's not a world out there where animals are not eating their own children, but they are eating their own children and everything. Right. So but that is because we are civilized, because we are living like that, so we believe that is not something that is supposed to happen. Now the first question that it came in, like first thought that came into my mind was the mother. Like I was thinking, such a close relationship, such a loving relationship, and then you do that. But there could have been like some sort of attachment issues. People usually there are many criminals that I know about who store like their dead parents, rotting corpses with them, and they try to dress them up, give them a bath and everything. So it's very psychological, I think, and we like there has to be something which is lying behind. So just calling them, like, all criminals are not mentally ill, but some are, and we have to be careful about like knowing that which ones are, which ones are not. And I think that is why we have all of these tests to determine.
Correct.
Okay, so the fourth one is psychopaths are incapable of forming genuine emotional attachments with others. Is that a myth or not?
I wouldn't necessarily say it is completely impossible, because they may form emotional bonds with individuals provided their tendencies of psychopathy reduce. The antisocial aspects and the narcissistic aspects, if they reduce, then perhaps psychopathy can, an individual who is termed to be a psychopath can form real, long-lasting emotional bonds with people. Otherwise, they're thriving on faking emotional bonds invariably, right? Their lack of remorse and guilt, and also the fact that there is an elated sense of self, is one major factor that tends to allow them to alienate themselves from the rest of the society at large, right? Their social solidarity levels reduce vividly because of the fact that there is an elated sense of self, right? Whereas individuals who understand the fact that social solidarity is something that's important, because at the end of the day, humans are social creatures, right? So irrespective in whatever capacity, we need to act in complementary manners with other humans at the end of the day. If this is an idea that is reinforced through a rehabilitational demeanor to a person who is suffering from psychopathy, perhaps it is a possibility, but a risk of subsequent behavioral occurrence associated with psychopathy again is something that needs to be looked into.
Right. There is a spectrum of psychopathy also, right? Some people are more psychopathic than other people. So maybe in that spectrum, there might be some portion of people who are able to form genuine connections. But then what are genuine connections? And we don't know how to define that exactly. So
correct. It's a leap of faith at the end of the day. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So myth or not, juveniles who commit violent crimes are likely to continue their violent behavior into adulthood,
provided there is no intervention. Yes.
Okay. Myth or not, eyewitness testimony is often unreliable and can be influenced by various factors such as stress or leading questions.
Extremely true.
I'm waiting to talk to you about all of these. This is very interesting. Myth or not, memory is like a video recording and can be played back accurately at any time.
Extremely false. There are high possibilities of memory distortions to occur, because of which the most simplest of aspects of a memory can be altered over time. It's like a game of Chinese whispers. Eventually, the source memory and the memory that is being recalled are possibly going to have a lot of differences because of a lot of factors.
Right. So there is something in evidence law also, which is called the test identification parade. So what happens is, because from the time that investigation is there, from after the charge sheet is filed, before that the investigation happens, it could take more than from 60 to 90 days. In that whole period of time, it could happen that the memory of the person must fade away, or it could be that they have formed some other memories due to maybe influences by media and other people, and hearing things about that crime. So what happens is that the police, because a confession to a police or the identification that one witness can make of the accused, because that memory is not fresh for some time, so they are not able to put that in court. So what they do is, it's called the test identification parade, where they will take that person to the magistrate, and they will make sure that that's on record, that this person has identified this person, so that the memory is fresh. So the law also identifies that memory is something which is very unreliable, and people can often make different memories. So there is this very popular case about some person called Roland Cotton. I think it's an American case where the woman who was sexually assaulted, she really thought that this person who was Roland Cotton, in a police lineup, she identified him, and she said that this person has sexually assaulted me. And there was not much evidence related to, there was no alibi, nothing related to how he could be connected to this case. But just because he was selected out of that lineup, he was convicted, and he spent a lot of years in jail, his whole life in jail. And turns out when he came out, it showed that the person who actually did it was out and free and moving about, but they had a very similar face. And also the thing is that he was black, and the person who was actually the person who actually did the crime was also black. So the general bias that happens. But right now the woman and the man Roland are very good friends, and they have been doing exhibitions and everything together. So that happens like a lot of times, where people, like even eyewitnesses, somebody like the court has also established that in many cases, because there is physical contact, somebody, if let's say somebody rapes somebody or has some sort of sexual misconduct happens, the proximity is as such that even if the defense says that the illumination, the lighting in the room was not enough to see the person, they will still hold that this person has done that, because because of the proximity of the crime. Now if somebody misidentifies somebody, that can cannot hold up in the court of law, because that woman has identified you as that perpetrator. So it's, I think, a big thing about eyewitness testimony. Like, we need to discuss about that also. It's very tricky. All right. Okay. Serial killers are typically motivated by a desire for fame or attention.
Not always. So it's semi-true and semi-not, because there are different classifications in serial killers. Some serial killers do it for the fame and the general acknowledgement in society at large. Some of them do it for a purposive reason. Some of them have an ulterior motive. Some of them even may be affected from some form of a delusion because of which they're committing the set of crimes, right? For example, one of the most famous cases of Raman Raghav in India, it was also somebody who committed a set of crimes, but there was an initial diagnosis of chronic paranoid schizophrenia, right? So that also does have an influence in engaging in a spree killing, so to speak.
Okay.
I mean, I think even one of the letters that were decoded of the Zodiac killer in the United States of America, even that said that this person was committing crimes so that he could have slaves when he went to the afterlife. Right. So these are also, now where do they stem from? What is the reason as to why these are present? That is only best answerable by them and best knowable through them and the experiences they've had. But these are factors that do exist.
Right. Okay. A criminal's handwriting can reveal their personality traits.
So this comes from the field of graphology on some level. Graphology, which is essentially to understand more about a person's behavior based on the handwriting, the way that the person moves their pen and has certain strokes, that helps us in understanding more about the personality. Now, I personally do not have a lot of belief in the effectiveness of this as a technique. There are a lot of claims that state it do, but I personally don't believe, because handwriting is very extraneous variable. If I write my own name 5 times, there's a good chance not one of those 5 times my name is going to be the same way. So the strokes are going to be different, the individual dots that you place are different, the tittle across the T is going to be different. So it becomes very difficult to be objective when you've got so many variables, so many nuances present, right? Some people write in cursive, some people write in boxed letters, some people write in split letters, some people change their handwriting over time drastically. So that does not necessarily mean that there's an exemplary change in the personality as well. I could be having the same personality traits with a different handwriting.
Right.
So I wouldn't necessarily consider it to be true.
Right. Also, the instrument that you're using, maybe a ballpoint pen will have a different impact than like a ink pen, So difference in that is also there. But mostly, like, I believe that this is something that criminals are afraid of, because they might be caught due to the certain similarities and different handwritings and all. Because mostly criminals, they try to take newspaper cutouts and try to take words from that to send messages in. So it's something which can also be used to detect, if this person is a perpetrator or not.
With handwriting, I just want to add more. With handwriting, you can identify the person, yes, because every handwriting, the way that person writes, cannot be copied by a second person. So you can definitely identify whether it is written by this person. But you can't understand anything about their personality, is what I feel.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Just that people say that somebody who has like very strong, sharp edges to their handwriting, which means they're very either assertive or arrogant, and people who have cursive handwriting, they are more creative, they are more free flowing, so things like that. This could all be theoretical, but still very interesting to think about. More like it's on the lines for me related to like palm reading and things like that. It's very theoretical. It's fun to hear things. Yeah.
Like, it is given the tag of pseudoscience, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but pseudoscience is just science that is yet to be proven. So let's see. If there's a concrete proof to it, then maybe one day it can be incorporated.
Right, okay. Also, so the last one is, all criminals have a history of childhood abuse or trauma.
Possible. I will not completely discount it.
Okay.
It could also be it could be childhood trauma, it could be adolescent trauma, it could be trauma in the most recent of times as well. Trauma in general can be a contributor to criminality as well, for that matter. It's just that any trauma response that is not very healthy in nature could lead to certain antisocial tendencies as well. It also depends on what the traumatic incident is. If let's say that a child is experiencing is observing domestic violence in their own household, perhaps that is a behavior that they have conditioned themselves to see and learn as well, right? In psychology, there's different theoretical paradigms to learning as well. So one of them is the social learning theory, in which a person learns by imitation. So when this person grows up, they also engage in similar activities as they have observed from the other individuals. So that also is something that does happen.
Okay.
So it's possible, but again, extent of self-regulative behavior decides whether they truly want to commit the crime or they want to, stay away from it.
Right. This is very interesting because I thought that not all criminals might have that, because there is a difference between what you pick up from people like later on in life.
Exactly.
Because there could be people who I think, what do you think about the percentage of people who are young, who experience childhood trauma and start offending earlier, like because of the childhood trauma? Or do you think that somebody maybe who's 40 years old, who has not hurt a single animal, single human being in their entire life, do you think that their childhood trauma could convert into them being aggressive or have like having some sort of criminal tendency at the age of 40 or like older?
It all depends on the circumstances, honestly. Let's say at the sociological level, a child is committing crimes early on. Why are they committing crimes? Where is it stemming from? Is it because of peer pressure? Because conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder also are disorders in psychology that we see that are attributed to criminality and deviant behavior in general, especially conduct disorder. Because if conduct disorder is not taken care of, it may stem into antisocial personality disorder during the adulthood of the person.
Right. Okay.
So if interventions are not staged, the likelihood of such behavior being expressed is higher than that of when it is regulated, right? As in that if you are early interventions, if you're placing early interventions, the individual may not likely be a perpetrator subsequently, but in the absence of said interventions, they might, right? On the other hand, if a person who throughout their life has not necessarily committed any crime, but a trauma response can only happen if there is a causal factor to it. Okay. Why would a person out of angst suddenly commit a crime after 40 years, or let's say 30 years after their childhood experience, for example? There must be something that triggered that particular incident. No behavior comes from vacuum, right? There is always a cause and effect that is present. So that is how I believe it essentially works.
Okay.
So yeah.
Because I was thinking that if a child already has issues and has childhood trauma, that sort of anger and everything must manifest like later on in life as well. But for somebody to actually switch suddenly, at being 40 or 30 or like later, switching suddenly to becoming a psychopath, because I'm mentioning this because there have been so many cases where people like men have been convicted, like fathers and like older guys, who are 50s and 60s, have been convicted of rapes and murders like before, that they did in their 20s or 30s, and their families did not have a clue about this person could have done that. People have come out saying, the daughters have come out saying, my father would never hurt a fly. I don't think he would do something like that. So like, I don't know if people are able to hide this pretty well or not, or suddenly the switch happens like maybe later on in life. It's something which is...
Maybe they perhaps did have a penance that they served, they retrospected possibly, or at a rightly time period an intervention was staged such that they did not continue doing those particular acts, especially if you're talking about somebody who's in their 20s and committed crime, and then during their 40s who's now a family man and stuff, but they're now convicted for a crime that they committed 25 years ago, right? Now, at this point in time, there's a complete personality shift that is present in comparison to who the person who committed the crime versus that of the person that they are today. That could be a possibility, but how well and how truly is it a personality change? is it truly a personality change, or is it that they just kept it hidden well enough?
Right.
Right. So that's what it is.
Right, because people are, it's easier for us also. Everyone has masks around different people.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
right, so that's it's very interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the polygraph test finally. So I didn't know that the person who made the polygraph, he also made Wonder Woman. Like that is
Yeah, that's true.
okay, that is like completely different. I was reading about it and I was like, okay, that is something which is completely different. So polygraph essentially, which is called the lie detection test here, in quotes in media, it's the link between blood pressure and lying. So it checks all of your physiological effects on your bodies while you're talking, while you're saying, while you're answering questions. So but obviously, just as you mentioned, they are not admissible in court. So like, can you like mention about like what polygraph really is, and like is something in detail?
Sure. So you mentioned that the polygraph examination uses physiological parameters, one of which is the blood pressure. Blood pressure is measured by a device that is called as the cardiosphygmograph. It is the PP cuff that we commonly see in hospitals. It is placed on your dominant arm over here, exactly here, right above this particular section. Okay. Then we place two respiratory tubes on the chest and the abdominal area to measure the change in respiratory levels. And finally, we also place two metallic plates on the index and the ring finger to measure the change in sweat levels. Now, all of these are measuring different physiological parameters. But why are we even measuring it? What is the idea? The basic idea is that when a person lies, there are certain changes that occur in their body, which is a response that occurs involuntarily. If I go into the science of it, all of us have what is called an autonomic nervous system. Okay. The autonomic nervous system is responsible for the involuntary functionality of the body. In that, sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system are two types. The sympathetic nervous system activates when a person is in stress and when a person is afraid of something. That is when you will see a fight or flight response, and that is when the physiological changes will occur. For example, let's say that I got chased by a dog. Okay. I love dogs, but when there are 5 dogs staring at you and growling, you don't like dogs that much, right? These 5 dogs are growling at you, and you tend to sweat a lot more than usual. Your pulse is off the roof. You are breathing in a very shallow manner. All of these changes occur. But eventually, once the dogs are gone, your breathing comes back to normalcy. The polygraph also functions on this itself. A person whose baseline activity is present, the response of deception will have a higher physiological activity in comparison to the baseline, right? So that is the principle of the polygraph examination.
Okay, how long does it take for you to take the baseline also?
You can take a 60-second baseline, because at the baseline you're not asking any questions. You just connect all the sensors and you conduct what is called as a pre-test altogether, which is essentially you don't ask them any questions. You just take 60 seconds of blank data of them just sitting still. 60 seconds of that, so you have something as a frame of reference. After that, you start the actual examination. You go through three sequences of asking the same questions, and then you finish the examination by conducting one more baseline, which is called an end line or a post-test record. Okay. So that you can have a frame of reference.
Right. Okay. So since whenever, so there is a case law also, Fry versus the US. It was established there also that there is a link between blood pressure and lying and other physiological effects and lying. It is acknowledged by the courts also. It is an activity which is regularly used also to detect deception. But why is it that to this day polygraph has not been accepted or admissible in court or respected enough to not be called like a joke science?
So I think it does have some amount of significance. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the polygraph has corroborative significance because of, again, Selvi versus State of Karnataka itself, in which Selvi claimed in the court of law that the polygraph examination was conducted upon her without her consent. And it was conducted in a very improper manner as such, because of which the scientific validity of it reduced. And subsequently, she also mentioned that it violates Article 20, Section 3 of the Indian Constitution, which is right against self-incrimination. That is why its value is of corroborative significance, not just the polygraph, narco analysis. So brain mapping is a misnomer. Just like how the polygraph is sometimes called as lie detector, but that's not the actual name.
Right.
Similarly, brain mapping is a misnomer. The actual term is BEOS profiling, which is brain electrical oscillation signature profiling.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah. So that essentially also is another technique that comes under the same clause itself, which is of violation of Article 20, Section 3. So that is why their significance in the court of law is of corroborative significance. But I personally believe that if these investigative techniques' validity is high enough, they can be of significance to act as evidences in itself, provided all parameters of bias and type 1 or type 2 errors are diminished.
Even if you do practice polygraph in a controlled setting, why I'm asking you this question is because what is wrong with the polygraph test, the procedure maybe, or what is the general flaw in the polygraph test that the court is not absolutely saying that this is a valid test and we have to accept this because of XYZ reason? Like, what is the problem in the maybe like the procedure of how it is conducted? Because I can understand that, let's say, if a person has come out from the heat and who's coming in and sitting in a dark, empty room with a professional, that person who's a layman would obviously be like precipitating, like all of this, like they would be very hyper and they would not feel very good about this whole situation. So if you take like a 60 seconds of baseline and then you conduct the test, it's still going to like not show either it's going to show a false negative or a false positive then otherwise.
Correct. So it's not, you don't bring them in exactly and start. So there are certain procedures that happen before the polygraph examination as well. You introduce yourself to the subject, you conduct what is called as a forensic interview, or the pre-test interview, where all the facts of the case are ascertained from their perspective as well, and then from the investigating officer's perspective. And then you try to empirically test out by addressing both these narratives as part of the polygraph examination. So it does not happen directly within the very instance that the individual is brought to the forensic science lab. It takes a few hours. In the meantime, you are building rapport and introducing yourself to the subject and obtaining as much detailed information as possible.
Right.
Now, in terms of why the technique does not have individually, the polygraph examination itself, why it does not have a lot of significance per se, is because of the fact that the reliability and validity of these particular techniques is low, because there needs to be a lot more research done in improving the particular technique altogether. Now, in the current scenario, from what I understand, there are certain labs that are introducing new technology such that they are integrating a different device called as iDetect, which focuses on micro expressions. Right? So there are certain expressions associated with deception is what the theoretical foundation of the particular technique is. And to increase the validity and reliability, this is one way to go about it. So if this may perhaps be done, the validity may increase and hence it might have a lot more significance in the court of law.
Right.
Is what I believe, provided the Apex Article 20 Section 3 clause disruption that is being caused, which was claimed by Selvi, is lifted. But I don't see that happening.
So when it comes to psychopaths are very fascinating to everyone, because to know that an individual can get into the system and can improve themselves, and through therapy, through a lot of different things, and to know that this person is somewhat humanistic, is a little comforting, because let's say if I know that a prisoner or somebody who is convicted has some childhood trauma because of which he started assaulting women or did something else like domestic violence happened, it is a little bit more humanistic that way. But what about psychopaths? So psychopaths really are involved in the most gruesome of crimes. They are the most popular of all of these different criminals that are out there. So let's say, talking about the case of like Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez and Jeffrey Dahmer, all of these different people, they say that psychopaths are very, even if they have killed a lot of people, they are very charming. They're very easy to like talk to, and they're very you feel like you want to talk to them more. They're very mysterious, and there have been so many reports of women writing letters to Richard Ramirez or Ted Bundy, and just to this day, like there are podcast on who is cuter, Ted Bundy or Richard Ramirez. So all of these things that are happening, and the sensationalizing of these men especially. So it's difficult for people to hate them, right? Because of all of these things.
I would personally think that you should hate them for killing a bunch of people, but then I don't know what works in terms of hatred versus likeness in today's world, because people are crazy. I don't like, if I were to talk outside of objectivity and from a personal perspective, I've seen the most weirdest content in terms of like to like how you mentioned who's cuter, which psychopath is cuter and stuff like that. And there are some things that are very not safe for work that I can't say on this podcast that are also mentioned along with these particular individuals as well. So it scares me. It scares how we are, conditioned to take up such a place that we assume that this is behavior that I align myself with. Mm-hmm. That serial killing is something that I enjoy. Where do you draw the line in terms of where do you stop? What is behavior that you should not obviously entertain, and what is the behavior that you should? So yeah, I think a major of these behaviors somehow are them projecting in some form. Right. And they may be projecting some or for all they're doing it ironically just to become 15 seconds of fame, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it's very weird space that we are in today's day, where
it started all the way back in the 90s and the 80s. Like all of these serial killers back then also had fan mail coming in from women all over the world. Women were crying and fighting each other on who's going to marry him and things like that. Like a Ted Bundy I think Ted Bundy was on a dating show also. He was on a dating show and he won. But the girl who wanted to go out with him, who won the date with him, she said that once I started talking to him, there was something in his eyes that I just couldn't, spot and say that this is something wrong with him. So she just took off and she did not meet him on that date. And she said that I'm so lucky that I just had that intuition that I left that date at that moment. So you can see, you can watch these clips on YouTube on how charming he is on that dating show. So it's pretty incredible. Also, not just affection and women and letters and marriage, or not all of these things, but also there are people who have, or I would say criminals who have tried to copy their style of killings or their style of crimes, which is copycat killers, right? So these copycat killers will try to, even in the Zodiac case that you mentioned, there were so many copycat killers that were coming in with the fake letters, and these calls also, people panic a lot. So they used to spot one person of a particular race that they used to hate, and they used to say that this person is Zodiac killer, right? All of these different things were happening. So people are very fascinated by psychopaths, like at all moments of time. Now psychopaths and sociopaths, that's the difference about somebody who was born like that and somebody who became like that. But do you think that psychopaths who, theoretically we say that they were born like that, do you think that any sort of rehabilitation to these people, since I've set a context that these people are this way, and they are very happy about projecting themselves as killers, and they're very confident and bold while they're performing these killings. So do you think that these psychopaths, these people actually will benefit from the rehabilitation, and will that be sufficient for them?
It depends on their willingness at the end of the day. If they truly believe that their way of life is more superior than that of any rehabilitative perspective that is being showcased to them, they might stop the killings. You might prevent them from killing anybody else by detaining them, but you can't take psychopathy out of the person. And when I say rehabilitation, also for that matter, it's not the most yesterday I was a serial killer rampaging and killing bunch of people as and when I felt. Today I have become a pure soul, somebody who is very pious in nature and somebody who's just the most idealistic of human beings. No, rehabilitation is relative. If you can stop this person from killing anything or anyone, and you have enabled a sense of impulse control, you've reinforced some form of impulse control in the individual, that is still a win. So if you were able to do just that much also, I think it's great. But the question is, do they even want that much to be done?
Right. Okay.
It eventually, especially with counseling and psychotherapeutic endeavors, the one factor that predominantly ensures success rates to be higher than ever is the willingness of the person.
All right.
If the person is not truly willing, then the likelihood of these endeavors working is lesser.
But why, let's say in the scenario where somebody who is not a psychopath, he's a regular killer, so that person, let's say if he has been convicted and he has been sentenced to life imprisonment, then the willingness to actually change yourself for what, I don't know, like they would obviously have that in their mind that I'm not going to enter society ever again. There is no chance that I'm going to get bail out of this, and I am going to spend the rest of my life in prison. So now what? Like, why would I want to reform myself? So have you seen cases where people actually have some reasoning as to why they wanted to reform, even after they have had some life imprisonment?
So reformation would usually be attributed to some there may be a moral angle to it. There may be a altruistic reason to want to rehabilitate, to perhaps believe that there is more ways than one to live life and stuff like that. There may be a change, there may be a paradigm shift that may be introduced. I'm not personally aware of a lot of real life cases myself, but I'm sure there are existing case studies where one may be able to understand that rehabilitation as a focus is to reintegrate into society as a law-abiding citizen at the end of the day, right? If a person is truly willing to change, then there is a possibility that they may. If the rehabilitation is something that they look as futile, the success would be lesser. The rate of success would be lesser.
Okay, all right. So I came across this particular person called the Lombroso. So he was somebody who brought about the concept, which was this is not valid at all, this is not correct at all, but he brought about the concept about how like faces and people, what they look like, they determine if that person is a killer or not. So he said that people who are do particular crimes have particular sort of faces. So let's say if somebody has a very sharp nose, that person might do a particular crime or might have done a particular crime. Some people have like a whitish glint in their eyes and things like that. So he had a very interesting perspective about women also. They said that women are not on equal par as men in terms of evolution. So that is why women are not able to they don't even have the ability to commit crimes because they're not intelligent enough. So that was the view, and that the scientific community completely bashed him, and this is not acceptable at all. Sorry?
So yeah, completely disregarded and considered it to be false.
False, exactly.
Obviously, because this is deep rooted in sexism and racism, if you think about it. So, the person you're mentioning about, Cesare Lambrasso, was an Italian criminologist from back in the day. This is when the scientific era was just about to open up. When we look at the biological perspectives to criminality, the irony is Cesare Lambrasso is one of the earliest contributors, where originally these were certain perspectives that he had provided. Subsequently, newer information came into the picture which replaced the older schools of thought. Amongst all of these things, there was one thing that he said that was good, okay? Which was that a person with a unsound mind is likely to commit a crime. Basically, some form of mental dysfunctionality is likely to contribute to criminality, which is the only thing that is somewhat true in most of his narratives, if not all, right? There is a particular determining factor with the psychological factors that he early did understand. He did not have a name for it. It was not a psychological dysfunction, a neurobiological deformity, or anything of the sort, but rather, like, if I may say in the most casual of ways, kuch to gadbad hai. Basically, like KCP Pratik.
Okay, all
Right? So there's something there. It's just a matter of trying to identify what that is that happened subsequently.
Right. But obviously, my answer to his question is the Jolly Joseph case, which is so a woman who has come in, who has killed, maybe or not, still
Allegedly.
allegedly has killed 6 members of her family, all through cyanide poisoning, along with her boyfriend. Again, allegedly.
Allegedly.
So that is something which is a complete like answer to his question about women are evolutionary less behind and lesser than men, and that's why they're not able to. Mostly the people that she killed were men. So I think it would have been crazy to see him and Jolly Joseph in the same era and to talk to each other on maybe a podcast or something.
I would just like to add, evolution does not have to imply only in the field of committing crimes. Right. Women and men can do anything and everything that they desire to, irrespective of biological sex and gender identity that you have. You can do anything and everything. Just don't commit crime.
Right.
That is what I will say.
I think this is the takeaway from this whole episode today, that just don't commit crimes.
Yeah.
Because either you land up here with me or with you.
That's true.
Right, and I don't think I think it's all right if you don't come here. So with this case as well, what a sensational case that this has come with the wave and the whole documentary that has happened. It has been seen online, it has been seen overseas also, so people are very interested in this case, especially how, because the main question is how you've killed 6 people and you have so much authority, or people are so blindsided by your personality that they are not able to understand that you or pinpoint you as the main perpetrator, and how are you able to. So with Jolly Joseph also, when we say that there was some sort of sexual element there also, because she very conveniently maybe used a lot of these boyfriends or people who she was attracted to, and she tried to take their help and kill these people. So there comes the aspect of sexual exploitation also, or using sexual nature as like a way to manipulate people. And then the other part is that the sort of environment that she had created about deception, like faking her degree, not going to work, but also showing people every single day without fail that she is working on something. The test papers that she used to sign off on between, like, on the dining table in the whole house, and just that the ability to do that, I think that is something which is very fascinating. Also to pull this off for so many years and not have one person like pointing fingers at you.
Right. I think Jolly Joseph, if all the crimes that are stacked against her are true is a very good example of a psychopath in our country for sure, right? Uh, because from the primitive assessments that have been conducted so far, there don't seem to be any insanity-based conundrums being present. So, like in the legal language, I'm sure you know of this as well. There are two elements to every crime. There's actus reus and there's mens rea. Actus reus is the criminal act and mens rea is the guilty conscience. She does have the guilty conscience. That I'm sure she is somebody who is able to understand is competent enough to understand that a certain act committed is repercussionable. So the question then comes is, why did she do it? Right? Like there are elements of a power struggle here. There's a power dynamic thing that she has in mind. There's
with the mother-in-law, right?
With the mother-in-law, the entire family eventually also, like with both the mother and the father-in-law, and then the elated sense of self because of which she wanted to take away the person that she eventually married, the second husband, the mother and the child. Right? So even if those alleged crimes are actually something that she did connivingly commit, she is the textbook definition of a psychopath.
Right.
But on the flip side, if you look at the evidences that have been found, that is where the discrepancy arises. And some of the facts of the case don't make a lot of sense to me personally, and a lot of people that I've raised the same question. Why did nobody question her in the doctors, in front of the doctor, when she's in the, this person's got heart attack and no need of doing postmortem? One time somebody says, okay, fine. Two times somebody says, okay, fine. 5 to 6 times the same stuff is happening. And then eventually over a span of 14 to 15 years is when you are deciding ki nahi, dal mein kuch to kala hai. Right. So this is something that doesn't sit well with me. Now, if you excavate the remains of 6 bodies, the ones that were placed earlier on, naturally because of decay, you're not going to find a lot of evidence.
Right.
I'm surprised they still did find cyanide remains in 2 of the bodies. Because I would have thought that there mustn't be any signs of anything that may be present in the body. I don't know. Maybe the flesh was still in process of decay, and when they found the particular bodies, they obtained the cyanide from it. Otherwise, in the earlier ones, it must be just bones. Right? So that excavation also may not have been very beneficial. So now the problem here is you don't know what to do. How do we progress forward?
Right.
One avenue that I personally feel is firstly confirm her involvement in the case at hand. Because if you look at the documentary gives a very biased narrative. It is from the sister-in-law's perspective.
Right, absolutely.
And in between, Jolly's lawyer comes into the picture and gives a statement about all 6 of the alleged deaths that occurred and how she could not have been the perpetrator for any of them. As much as every person who is stating that this person is not the perpetrator, his points are valid. And even to the confession that Jolly gave to the sister-in-law, where this sister-in-law is saying that I did it, aise hi ho gaya, jaise to something happened. Now, that also is a confession that you don't know whether it's true or not, because it's a non-judicial confession. Right? And if it was in front of the magistrate, perhaps then there have been more weightage to it. But it wasn't even to a police officer; it was to the sister-in-law. Right. So there is no evidentiary value in that at all. It's just your word against mine.
Right.
So I think this case is very interesting in being able to understand how do we go about the utilization of psychological profiling and behavioral analyses in determining her involvement in the case at hand. Right? You can perhaps conduct an investigative technique like the polygraph or the BIOS also for that matter, which would help in identifying whether there is some form of concealed information that she's been hiding from people so far. That could be something that can be done, but then let's see.
I would say that there are many instruments in even the Evidence Act where you first establish what the person's motive or intention might be. So motive and intention are completely different in law.
Correct.
Motive and intention might be, then their preparation, and then the conduct. So
Correct.
conduct would also a certain like people around her, what kind of conduct they have. Maybe if she has been convicted and there are other people. So let's say if there is a property exchange that is currently going on just after she has she went to the prison, then that would indicate that she has been put behind prison in terms of a conspiracy so that they could get the property. So that is like a conduct analysis, what she acts like in front of the judge and the courts, and then also like obviously the preparation to if you can tie her to every single plan where she prepared all of these. Like they say that the mushroom capsules had cyanide, so how did she prepare that? Can you tie her to asking him to bring cyanide, taking that cyanide, putting it in the pills and everything? So the evidence is something which is very something which might help to bring her out if she has not done the crime, or if she has done it, that would be very
definitely tie her to.
That's the problem, that if she has not done the crime, it will I hope the evidence will be helpful here. But just that there is not a lot of evidence to particularly say that this person has committed the crime or not, because of the years of years that have gone by. But it's very I think it's also very interesting that somebody can hide behind like layers and layers of complexities, and just and overall the image of somebody deceiving you about not having a job, you suddenly start believing that maybe she could have murdered then because she didn't have a job. Then maybe she could have murdered somebody. So like that connection that our brains make, that is also something which is very like psychologists particularly can come in and say that this is like this is how it's happening, and this is how she can be taken out. And there is a whole lot of media trial documentaries that are coming out, but I'm
exactly.
But finally a female psychopath though in India.
Again, we don't have to be proud about it, but okay,
you go
kudos. More power to you, less power to killing, and more towards bettering lives.
Right, exactly. So also when we are talking about people concealing their intentions, and I think for one person it's easier to conceal their intentions and their motives about why they're doing what they're doing or how they're doing things. But for a whole family, for 11 people to conceal their intentions, what they're doing, what is happening, like even right from older like ladies,
elders of the house,
right, elders, old like these people in their 50s to little kids who were there in the family, all 11 of them were able to accurately conceal what they were actually doing in that house, which is the Burari murder case, right? So obviously again very sensational. So it really is very surprising, and I would like to take your perspective on how maybe like a cultish formula could have been taken here, where there was a cult in America also, where the spiritual guru made everyone drink poison together, and there were so many deaths at the same time. Right, so it could have been like a cultish formula, and so I think this is the first time where we have seen something like a mass psychosis that is happening. So I would like to take your take on what do you think about this case, and do you think it's possible for people to actually hide this level of preparation and everything from people outside, and that too considering the age difference between all of them?
Correct. So my take on this is that there are elements of shared psychosis that were observed in the case, yes. But again, there are a few loopholes. There are a few discrepancies in information. Of all the family members, some of the family members were tied loosely. Now, if all the family members are dead, how are all their hands tied? Obviously, there must have been external help.
Right.
So the question then also that comes is, who else was in on it? And were they also a part of the psychosis? Or were they somebody who were part of a higher or a much different plan? That there was something very different that that of what was originally there. Maybe for all you know, this was some form of a serious killing spree that has been fabricated. Now, this is one possibility. I'm not saying I believe it. This is one possibility.
Right.
On the other hand, there is the commonly assumed nature of the case, which is shared psychosis,
Right.
which stems from the occult beliefs and the religious practices that
Right.
are or slightly of a antisocial nature, if I may add. That like how you mentioned, this is one of the first cases in our country that has sensationalized our country in terms of criminal behavior as such. And in addition to that, it perhaps has given a lot more acknowledgement and significance to the behavioral significance in criminality and deviance, and where forensic psychology as a field could have shined, and did shine for that matter as well. So in that particular case also, for that matter, I think we can state that shared psychosis was the major way that things went down, but we need some form of a confirmative manner. Now, in an instance where you do not have a victim who is alive to tell you, you can conduct something that is called as a psychological autopsy. Okay. Now, a psychological autopsy is essentially a part of the investigative process where you assimilate all information about the individual and their behaviors over time, and then formulate an understanding of whether this was a suicide or a homicide. Essentially, a psychological autopsy is utilized for that very reason. It is to confirm or dispute or solve the dispute of whether a particular death has occurred because of suicide or homicide, whether there were signs of self-emulative behavior or self-harm based behavior, or the willingness to take one's life, or was there an external that is present, an external stressor that is present. In this particular case, based on all the diaries that were present, in which it stated that grandpa will come back if we complete this puja. Now, if one person is believing it, fair. But here is where I am questioning to some extent the shared psychosis aspect, that how did 11 to 12 family members collectively agree, ranging from children up to the house elders. Now, like if you look at how we as a country have a cultural viewpoint, we tend to look at our elders generally with respect, when you would consider them the authority. How did the younger son of a house attain said authoritative status? Because of the claim that he had some form of a connection with the grandfather, right? Now, even if you look at the case history of the younger son as well, Lalit. I think his name was Lalit. Yes, thank you very much. So even in his case, also for that matter, there was certain traumatic incidents because of which he had gone mute for 4 to 5 years. Now, what was the nature of that particular experience? Did that experience have some distinctive ramifications on the neuroplasticity of the individual that may have led to the emergence of shared psychosis, of psychosis in that person at the very least, right? So these are also aspects that come into consideration.
But is that the fact that everyone had a very normal behavior, of course, if there is shared psychosis, there is some belief then that this particular thing which is away from reality does exist and is part of my reality. Now, to appear normal to other people, having social interactions to the point that you have a marriage function, like one of these functions at your place, you're about to take your somebody's getting married from your house to go to some other house, like being very normal, and owning a shop also, like a dairy shop and like a small grocery shop there. So all of these are very, like, these people were very normal. It's a regular Bhatia family that was out there, but what, I don't know, like it's very scary to imagine that is it very difficult to understand or to maybe pinpoint people who are actually going through like this sort of mental challenge, or as a society, like what can we do to like not overlook all of these situations?
So, if you talk about psychosis as an entity in itself, there's a huge spectrum of it. There's several disorders in which some of them it is very obvious from an observational viewpoint that this person is somebody who has certain disorders, who has certain concerns associated to hallucinations and delusions, while others that may not be very obvious, right? So, as a society, as a collective, our job perhaps may be to be more inclusive of these particular things and provide I would perhaps link this to a more bigger point, that is to provide importance to mental health as an entity altogether, and not to discount lived experiences, because any person who's going through a certain experience, to them it is as valid as their reality. To us it might sound as out of place or weird as possible. For example, if I take another case, the case of Daniel McNaughton, based on whom the insanity plea exists in our country and across the world also for that matter, I think. That person also had an assumption that the Prime Minister is trying to kill him, right? So he shot at the Prime Minister didn't get shot, eventually he was taken to the court of law. Now, because of the presence of a certain mental condition, this is why the person is the way they is. So rather than ostracizing them, perhaps empathize with them further and try to understand where it stems from. But then for that, you first of all need to understand and know that you have to be empathetic and hear them out in the first place, and then sometimes they may not be obvious signs.
Right. So that's the point, right?
That is a conundrum. I won't lie. Right. It is a conundrum that is bound to be there. If we as a collective are more mindful about mental health concerns just as much as we are about physical health concerns, maybe we are progressing in the right step.
Right, but it's very scary to think that another family in another house, in your neighborhood, could have a cult forming there, could have occultish activities going in, and you don't know. They are just the family that you get your grocery from, or just the family who walks their dog in the evening. It's very different to like think about this in that, because this case actually is something which is very close by to my house. So whenever we cross Burari, I would always look at that house, and you can see that house with the pipes still there, and people have all sort of stories going in that, also just that the fact that it's very convenient to villainize one person, which is Lalit here. Everyone, whoever is talking about, is saying that Lalit was the main person who was practicing this, or somebody who actually convinced everyone. But I feel that there is something that we don't know about this. Like there is something which is hidden or has not come into light right now, which is still under wraps, and we may never see the light of the day for us. And the fact that we are involved in these conversations and everything, at least the flame is still burning, just that we will never know the truth anytime.
It's very sad if that isn't the case and a true perpetrator escapes. Every time a perpetrator escapes, hundreds of other victims are also under their crosshairs. So you don't know what might happen next. So if there truly is a perpetrator, maybe there's a remarkable, significant evidence that is somehow found, and then we can only hope at the end of the day, of course.
Right, absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you about something which came up before in this conversation, which was about weapons. So when I was reading on this particular like weapons and the availability of weapons, just to connect that something which is sharp like that could be similar to something somewhat like an injury that a kukri can make. Now that is the association that forensics and the experts made, just because they somehow thought that Hemraj could be the one who murdered Arushi, right, till he was found. Right. And then the whole narrative changed. So do you think that there could be mistakes like that in forensics also, where you understand that this person is from a certain background and you suddenly relate that this is how it could have happened, and make assumptions like that. So I don't think I'm asking this because in law it's very difficult to establish evidences like that and to make a distinction between what is a bias, what is not. Because if I get to know from a forensic expert that this mark or this uh, particular injury is from a kukri, then I would accept it as that and I would not question it, because I'm a lawyer, I'm not supposed to get into that. So now if that is the case, then do you how do you make sure that these sort of biases are taken in account, and everyone who's working on the case is like purely just working on it just as like a new chapter and not taking their biases with them?
Correct. So this is something that I think I was talking about earlier on with respect to intrinsic biases and extrinsic biases, right? These are biases that are woven into our narrative, which take on the fact that, okay, so my gut instinct tells me that this is how the crime was likely committed, based on the fact that I've seen 20 other cases in which similar crimes have been observed, and these have been the reasons as to how these have been the ways that the crime has been committed. So I will operate under my gut instinct, which has usually been right. And now that is where the problem arises. Now, I'm not discrediting the gut instinct of an investigator or a forensic expert, because they've acquired it naturally through experience, and they do have some credibility, obviously. But this gut instinct is going to be the thorn of the rose, because you are trying to prove a fact based on your gut instinct rather than wanting to ascertain a fact in itself. Your objectivity becomes a compromise. So I think one way that this can happen and ensure that a biased analysis does not happen is to be as factually responsible as possible, be as objective in your evaluations as possible, be thorough with your analyses and the techniques of analysis such that there is no possibility of human error that may arise. So the truest answer for this is efficiency and integrity at the end of the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in your own experience, since we have talked about like a different like cocktail of different deception detection techniques, so which ones are, you would say, that used very often and in today's scenario, in any crimes that happen right now, and are very reliable in terms of just investigation purposes, not in terms of court and how they appear in court, but just that very reliable in that way?
So in terms of the detection of deception techniques that can provide a lead in the investigative process, the most commonly used are the polygraph, narco-analysis, and bias profiling itself. These are the ones that are used mainly. So it would be best to utilize these techniques itself subsequently also to ascertain more information, especially bias as a technique in itself. Now, bias profiling, if I go into the context of how it works, it focuses on the idea that a person who has experienced an event is going to have a different reaction when that particular memory is recalled versus that of a person who's never had that memory in the first place and is imagining it, is conceptualizing it. Now, for example, if I say that the Taj Mahal was built in Agra and it's white in color, it's made out of whatever material and stuff, does that mean I've been to the Taj Mahal? No. Why? Because that's a common fact. I can imagine, I can remember this information. But so to discuss what are the investigative techniques that are of elemental significance in terms of detection of deception, I think these are the techniques that are commonly utilized. With the bias examination I was mentioning, if I have a memory of going to a certain place, naturally I will have certain different parts of my brain activate versus that of what will happen when I have not had the memory of it. If it is not a part of my autobiographical memory, I am not going to have a lot of significant amount of information that can be obtained from it, right? So that is the whole idea here. So these are techniques that are of elemental significance from a forensic viewpoint, from an investigative parameter at the very least, to act as corroborative information in providing a lead in an instance where you don't have a lot of um, leads per se otherwise in a case. So yeah.
So the polygraph and narco analysis are very old. BOS is a little younger than both of these, right? But then
Right.
are there other techniques also? Because if I say that the reliability of these in court now for investigation purposes, in order to corroborate facts or to just to find out maybe where the murder weapon is, it's very these techniques are very effective just for the police work. But when it comes to court, then just to bring more weight into these theoretical or these investigative techniques, are there new techniques which are coming in, or are the police adopting different techniques and improving on them while they're working on it?
So there are newer techniques that have been identified. I don't know whether they've been incorporated into forensic settings yet. Currently, I believe they are present in laboratory settings. In the sense that research is still going on in these particular techniques to ascertain their validity, reliability, the sensitivity and specificity of these particular techniques is something that they're trying to establish and understand.
Okay.
Once its credibility is established, perhaps they can be introduced into the real world. One of which I mentioned earlier, which is the eye detect, which is an analysis of micro expressions, which is now co-joined with the polygraph examination. So this version of it is present in the Center of Excellence in National Forensic Sciences University, Gandhinagar.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm also because of the purview of how cybercrime is also increasing a lot, and how people who generally don't commit crimes in the real world, they might find it more appealing to go online and commit crimes like that. So is there any other forensic technique which investigative technique where you can you can sense that okay, this person is more likely to commit cybercrimes, or is there any way that where deception could be filtered out like that? So
it would be very difficult to state that a person is likely to commit a crime, be it a physical crime or a cybercrime for that matter. The presumptive parameter here is difficult to establish because, again, humans, while we are creatures of habit, we have something called as free will. Supposedly, we have free will. There are a few philosophical discussions that say otherwise, but
the Big Brother is watching us, so it's okay.
Yeah, or Big Brother or Illuminati or whatever you call it. Now, we're conditioned to believe that we have free will. Let's go with that assumption. Now, with said free will being present, I can act out in any manner. Today, I might post inspirational stuff on my Instagram. The very next day, I might post something that is extremely horrifying and something that's very disgusting in nature, right? So, with the advent of the internet, because of so much exposure and reach that has been persistently present, especially in the last 10 years, if you look at it, the 8 to 10 years since the advent of accessible internet, if I may call it. Every person back in the day, now I sound like an old person, but back in the day, easy access to internet was a privilege. Now it is a common thing, right? Now, because of how extensively the internet is present, behaviors of individuals that were seen in person are now being released online. And the protection of anonymity also does push people further in committing cyber crimes as well. Which could be as simple as, I wouldn't say simple, but rather something like cyber stalking and cyber bullying as well. Internet trolls, hate comments. These are right now, if you go to any Instagram account that has more than 100,000 followers or subscribers, followers, that shows how old I am. Kidding.
I'm saying that this conversation is bringing a lot of boomer energy from both of us.
More me than you perhaps, but yes. Like a lot of followers, there's a very good chance that their comment section is filled with trolls, right? Like right now, if I go to any sports person, also for that matter, IPL just went by. People are cussing at them for no reason whatsoever,
Right.
just because they have the ability to do so.
Mm.
Now, this, I don't know if forensic psychology can do a lot to predict criminality here, but not even criminality, this deviant behavior here, but perhaps certain policy regulations within the framework of Meta in itself,
Mm.
which give lesser anonymity and more credence to being able to identify these individuals. Because right now I can create 5 different accounts and nobody's ever going to know.
Mm.
Right? For all you know, I have 5 accounts already.
Right.
So you don't really know what the purpose of these particular accounts are. So I think going further, there might be a day where eventually social media becomes such that you have to link your Aadhaar card with it.
Mm.
Maybe that might reduce the distinctive likelihood of anonymity being a problem, and maybe cybercrimes may reduce that. Because keyboard warriors will hide behind a keyboard and do what they do, but when their identity is established, they can't do much, right? Because then there are repercussions. The fact that online trolling is so vehemently present in today's day and age, despite there being norms in our legal code of conduct about how much of a deviant act it is, we still see individuals comment inappropriate and vile and disgusting stuff all over the internet, not just Instagram, even Reddit, even Discord, Facebook, also for that matter.
Right.
So
maybe
maybe certain
and the dark web, especially like these things, when it's okay to be vile and it's okay to not filter or maybe
Exactly.
not try to hurt people. So especially like there was a kid, right, Discord killer, who used to play video games, and that was a Bangladeshi boy, Bangladeshi origin boy in UK, I think. I'm not very sure, but this kid who was 16 years old, he killed both of his parents, his sister, his this grandmother also. Like all of these people he killed, and he was updating his Discord groups about how he's killed them, and he was sharing pictures with them, and he said that I know that I should be going to the jail, and he didn't seem to have any remorse like that. So just to get some social credits or some social points from these people and be more popular, or maybe look for fame and all of this, I think that is something that we have to look out for. That is why I was asking you, because I think cyber crime is something which is increasing day by day. Just as we are talking, there is something being committed right now in that web, but still the laws are not catching up, and I don't think we have certain techniques where we can either predict that this person is going to do that, or just to see that how do we even rehabilitate somebody like that, or give particular different psychological techniques on how to get this person out of this particular mentality of making crimes online. Because there are certain people who are more likely to do cyber crimes than physical crimes, is because of how comfortable people feel on cyber.
Ease of access,
right?
well.
There are many people out there. I don't know if you know about this disorder or not. I don't know the particular Japanese name for it, but teenagers right now, and even people in their late 20s, are not ready to come out of their rooms at all. So what they do is that they stay in their rooms whole day, and when their parents go to sleep, or when the household is completely dead, then they would come out, they would eat, they would spend time there, but they just hate looking at people. They just can't take it. They can't look at people, and there are so many people who are getting into that zone, and these people are known to be more likely to be online, and because of that, the freedom that they get out there, it could be that there could be a translation of that time online to having a lot of access to the internet and not having any restrictions, because of there is no law right now, and that converts into some crime, and we don't know what that crime is, what that crime could be, and we just have to like wait hand on hand just for them to actually commit something, so that we can make laws on that, which is very something that we have to work on very
The preventive aspect of cybercrime comes from the fact that you need to understand what the cybercrime is, like how we mentioned. right? It becomes otherwise very difficult in. So otherwise, you are just presuming that a person is likely to commit certain crime based on certain base characteristics, and then that in itself has an ethical conundrum of presumption of guilt. You're automatically assuming that this person is likely to commit a crime, but you do not have any concrete proof for it. So that also becomes another ethical dilemma, which has its which could again build into new other different avenues on the basis of racism or sexism. You are presuming that I am likely to commit a certain crime, even though I'm sure that I never will, and I never have, and I'm not currently either. So the sad part is that a crime can only be investigated and a perpetrator can only be caught after they've done something, at least once, right? So maybe as the saying goes, prevention is the best form of cure. So interventions and policy amendments that are effective in identifying these particular no, I wouldn't say individuals, but rather the content that is shared, the conversations that are happening. These need to be monitored. But then monitoring also has its own problems in the sense that there is no right to privacy. Censorship is violating. So it's a hodgepodge. It's a huge mess. I don't know how people are going to, set things straight. So yeah, it's a huge mess.
It is actually. That is why countries are actively working on making treaties and making regulations on privacy. So Canada, especially from the last episode that I did, Canada especially has great privacy laws, and you can be a privacy information professional also there. So it's just to protect people's privacy and everything. So it's very interesting, like how countries are also working on all of these domains together and also collaborating, because the crime is something which is so not imaginable. Like what will happen, how it will happen, people don't know, and because it's in the future and maybe not today, that's why everyone's like trying to make laws which will quickly once the fire is there, we are able to extinguish it quickly as it came. Right. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me on this interview, on this talk show actually, because I was very excited to have you, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope our audiences here also enjoyed.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I have been waiting for it to happen as well. I was literally counting the hours before it started.
Oh.
So, yeah, it was great and exciting.
Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful guest, and this is like one of my favorite conversations ever. And I will be looking at this video again and again to get like more pointers, because it was really a big learning for me, all the new things that you told me today. And I think the audience will also appreciate how knowledgeable you are, and how you shared a lot of information about these things which we sensationalize, but they do have a lot of humanistic, psychological, private perspective also, where each individual is different and they have committed something. You might need to rehabilitate that person as well. So thank you so much everyone for joining. We'll see you next week on Log S Talk Show. Thank you so much.